Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 15th of July, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by Patrick Henningsen, who will be speaking to us from Washington, DC. Iran.
Jeremy Hunt is at the EU Foreign Affairs Council this morning, and the topic of conversation, the main topic of conversation, is indeed Iran. So let's have a brief listen to his doorstep here.
At what point do you declare the Iran deal dead?
Well, it isn't dead yet, and we are totally committed to keeping the Middle East denuclearized. If Iran acquires nuclear weapons, then other countries in the region will acquire nuclear weapons. It becomes a very, very toxic and dangerous situation. So we are looking to find a way to preserve the nuclear deal, which we think is the best way of keeping the Middle East as a whole nuclear weapon free. Iran is still a good year away from developing a nuclear weapon. We think there is still some closing but small window to keep the deal alive, and that's what I'm here to talk about.
So that's what he's saying, Brian. The question is that what Britain's doing? I'll come on to that in a second, but what are your thoughts?
Well, two things. One, it'd be nice if the British public were actually told what their government was doing on a day-by-day basis. Has this been discussed? And it's our policy to keep the Middle East nuclear free. And if the Middle East is nuclear free, how have we got Israel clearly with nuclear weapons?
Well, that's a very good question. Patrick, you got any thoughts on that particular issue?
Yeah, I would just echo what I was going to say what Brian just said. Israel has an undeclared nuclear stockpile, upwards of anyone's guess, 200 or so nuclear warheads. So Jeremy Hunt's statement is quite disingenuous, I guess you could say. Is he intentionally mentioning Israel in that conversation of the Middle East being nuclear free? And not only that, the United States also, we don't know exactly what they have in the region when their naval assets are parked in the Persian Gulf. So, you know, what does the U.S. have in terms of nuclear capabilities at any given time with all of its assets parked all over the region? It's difficult to say. But I would also just echo what you said, Mike, that Britain seems to be quietly undermining the JCPOA by basically following the dictates of Washington, by seizing a tanker and open piracy.
Right. Well, look, hold that thought, Patrick. Hold that thought, because the question is just how quiet is that? Now, he was asked then, would the UK be taking, or would the EU be taking concrete action if Iran doesn't come into compliance with the JCPOA once again? And he said yes, there would be a joint investigation. He didn't say what sanctions there might be. He wasn't prepared to go that far. But then he had this to say.
At what level do you think that you are the adults in the room here in Europe, with Iran on one side breaching the conditions of the deal, and on the other side, if we're to believe your outgoing ambassador to the US, the current administration only ditched the deal to spite President Obama?
Well, the thing that we agree with the Americans on is that the long-term solution to the tensions in the Middle East is an Iran which ceases the destabilizing activity that's happening in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and that is the root cause of the problems. We have a different view as to how we keep the region denuclearized, but we have very open channels of communication on that, and I spoke to Secretary of State Pompeo yesterday, as well as talking to Foreign Minister Zarif in Iran the day before.
Okay, so that's good stuff. Well, look, let's consider what Britain has been doing here. And of course, the BBC reported last week, Strait of Hormuz, Iranian boats tried to intercept British tanker. Of course, this was in retaliation, they said, for the UK's seizure of an Iranian tanker near Gibraltar. Well, what did this article actually have to say? They said Iranian boats tried to impede a British oil tanker near the Gulf before being driven off by a Royal Navy ship, the Ministry of Defence has said. HMS Montrose, a British frigate shadowing the BP-owned tanker, was forced to move between 3 boats and the tanker, a spokesman said. He described the Iranians' actions as contrary to international law. Now, this is a key point. Just keep that in mind while we go through this a little bit. Iran had threatened to retaliate for the seizure of one of its own tankers, but denied any attempted seizure. So we've got Britain seizing an Iranian ship, and the Iranians allegedly retaliating for that. But CNN published this article over the weekend. Iranian boats attempted to seize a British tanker in the Straits of Hormuz, and this is what they had to say. The UK's Royal Navy frigate, HMS Montrose, had been escorting the tanker from the rear. It trained its deck guns on the Iranians and gave them a verbal warning to back away, which they did, according to the UK source. Montrose is equipped on the deck with 30mm guns specifically designed to drive off small boats. UK officials had previously confirmed that the Montrose was in the region performing a maritime security role. But here's the key bit. The article then goes on to say, on July 10th, the tanker ship, which is the British Heritage, turned off its transponders for almost 24 hours, making it undetectable by radars. Now, of course, turning off a transponder doesn't make it undetectable by radar. All it does is it removes the identification signal from the radar screen so they can't identify what it is. Now, remember this issue from what Jeremy Hunt had said with respect to international law, or the Ministry of Defence said with respect to international law. Well, the international law is quite simple on this. Regulation 19 of SOLAS Chapter 5 requires AIS to be fitted aboard all ships of 300 gross tonnage and upwards engaged on international voyages. The requirement became effective for all ships by 31st December 2004. Ships fitted with AIS shall maintain AIS in operation at all times, except where international agreements, rules, or standards provide for the protection of navigational information. That doesn't seem to apply in this case, Brian. So Britain, is it not, is in breach of international law?
Well, this is certainly how it appears, and it's very interesting when you do a little bit of analysis on what the reporting in the so-called mainstream press is, things start to fall apart.
Absolutely. So if we actually look at what happened here, it seems that British Special Forces seized an Iranian tanker, that's Grace 1 off Gibraltar on the 4th of July. We were then with respect to this latest incident, as Jeremy Hunt says here, as I said to the Iranians at the weekend, the detention of the Grace 1 was a Gibraltar-led enforcement of EU serious sanctions. Action had to be taken, and this was nothing to do with the oil being Iranian. However, the Iranians seem to have responded in some way. But then this ship, British Heritage, headed off to the Gulf. Apparently what happened was that, according to multiple news reports, the British, diverted this tanker, which was in the Persian Gulf, originally heading for Basra to take a load of oil. That was diverted to Saudi Arabia, no oil on board. And then on the 10th of July, we sent it out from Saudi Arabia back through the Straits of Hormuz, again without any oil. And so the question is, why would an oil tanker leave the Gulf without oil? It seems a bit strange. And then on top of that, we apparently have deployed our only naval ship in the area, HMS Montrose, to accompany British Heritage. The Financial Times, for example, reported that there are between 15 and 30 British tankers in the Gulf at any one time. So why was this particular empty tanker chosen to be shadowed by the only Royal Naval ship in the area? And Patrick, it seems to me, therefore, that we are baiting the Iranians, attempting to draw them into something here, and that seems like a noisy action, not very quiet, to undermine the JCPOA.
Sure. What you just outlined there, Mike, looks like this tanker, the Heritage, is a clear use of a casus belli that's just designed as a provocation. I think that seems to be what you've indicated there by those reports. But so Britain is quietly enforcing these global sanctions as it were. Although it's denying that it knew it was Iranian oil, etc. What it's doing is basically doing the work of the United States off to the side in a kind of unofficial, aloof capacity. And so they are kind of undermining the JCPOA in that respect. If they were really supporting the JCPOA with the European partners, they wouldn't be engaged in actions like that, because they're obviously going to be translated as aggressive moves towards Iran. And so in terms of Jeremy Hunt, he's echoing the talking points of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. Clearly, he's reading off the exact same script. So, and also it should be pointed out, and Hunt, of course, didn't point out, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu boasted that he is the reason. He said this in the summer of 2018, that he is the reason why the United States, why Trump pulled out of the JCPOA agreement in May of 2018. And that should be duly noted.
Brian, we'll just end with this quote from him. Following the brave work of our Royal Navy in the Persian Gulf, we will work with partners to maintain the right of commercial ships to go about their rightful business. I don't think that's what they were doing.
Not at all. They were baiting, and we're back to this outrageous hypocrisy by the British government, constantly telling other nations how to run their own affairs, accusing other people of doing the very things that the British government is doing. So I think this one is laid bare. But isn't it interesting that just at the time we can see that trouble in the Middle East is being ramped up with the help of Britain and some elements of the US in the background. We've got this. It's hooray holidays, but actually it's time to be afraid. So what are we on? Well, we're back on this. Let's see whether we can bring this on screen. Police urge Scots to stay alert for terror attacks while on holiday and watch the safety video. Well, this has been plastered across UK media. So here's the same story in the London Economic. Holidaymakers urged to stay alert for terror attacks. And what else have we got? ITV News, holidaymakers urged to stay alert for terror attacks. We notice that we're using the same headline, the same image. So this is clearly something which is just being spread across the media. But we've also got the Metro, families told to stay alert for terror attacks on their summer holidays. So get off on your summer holiday. Have a good time, but make sure your head is full of the fact that you're going to die in a terrorist attack, presumably stoked up with the help of the British government. But we've got ministers helping this along. So here's Ben Wallace, Conservative Party rep, but he's for the rep for security and economic crime. He says, I ask that holidaymakers take a minute before they travel to watch the Run, Hide, Tell film, which offers practical advice and could end up saving their lives should the worst happen. It's powerful stuff. He also urges everybody to read the full details of their travel insurance to ensure they're appropriately protected.
What are they going to do? Wave a piece of paper at the alleged terrorists?
Well, possibly, but of course you could be delayed at an airport. The risk is very low. Everybody's stressing that the risk is very low indeed. But here's the minister saying, well, you need to get your insurance. It'll help Lloyd's of London, of course, because they'll be backing this. Here's the local report on it, because it's through to Devon. Here's Devon Live, Run, Hide, Tell. And it's quite a good article, actually, so I encourage you to go and read this. It says, as UK schools break up for the summer holidays and the travel industry prepares for one of the busiest periods of the year, counter-terrorism policing wants holidaymakers to watch vital safety information. And this is a video made in 2017, if I got this right. And then, since then, more than 10 million people have viewed it, and they now know how to take action or respond should the worst happen. People can only take this action, Mike, now that they've been briefed by the British government, because they couldn't think for themselves before. See whether we can just bring a little bit of this clip in. Run, Hide, Tell. And of course, it starts off by saying that attacks are rare, unlikely, but you need to know what to do. And here's the hotel with the scene set, everybody enjoying themselves. But of course, what they should be doing is thinking what to do if an attack occurs. And it gets better, because I think as the plot unfolds, we've got a little bit of EastEnders. If you hear the gunshots, make sure you know what to do. Safe routes, run. run. Make sure you run and act quickly, and leave your belongings. Leave anybody who doesn't want to run, leave them behind. So if you're there with your elderly parents, just leave them because you're going to run. Is the East Ender lady. We won't do too much of this, but it's worth watching a bit. So if there's a safe route, run. And then we get on to some really remarkable stuff, because here's the manager who's got a responsibility, I believe, to make sure other people are safe. But he goes into utter panic mode. So he's hiding behind the desk. He's running through the kitchen. We've got to avoid dead ends and bottlenecks. And he ends up in the safest place in the hotel, where they tell you, get behind a physical barrier if people are armed. Well, I'm not sure the average hotel door is going to help you much in that case. But there we are. Put your mattress in front of the door. Have a good holiday. It's incredible, isn't it? Well, let's just finish off, because this is Michael Orchard, Counter-Terrorism Policing National Coordinator. He says an important part of my job is deploying police officers and staff around the world to share the UK's world-renowned security expertise to better protect people from harm. So we can't actually police UK at the moment, but the police are disappearing around the globe to protect everybody, even though the risk is minuscule.
It's making me feel safer already.
Yeah, so there you are.
Any thoughts, Patrick?
The only thing that came to mind is if that scene happened in Texas or Arizona, it wouldn't be run, tell, hide. It would be to remove your weapon from your holster and take a firing position and neutralize the threat, basically. So there's a slightly different narrative in a lot of American states. That ad probably wouldn't run very well.
Well,
Yeah.
I've got to say on that one, I'm not squeamish on the firearms issue, and you're absolutely right. But here in UK, we cannot think for ourselves. We need the government to tell us what to do in any form of emergency. What are the British going to do? They're going to be running.
Brilliant. Now, Sunday week ago, of course, the Sunday Mail released some memos, some cables involving the US Ambassador to the United States, Kim Darroch. And if you remember, he said, we don't really believe this administration, the Trump administration, is going to become substantially more normal, less dysfunctional, less unpredictable, less faction-driven, less diplomatically clumsy and inept. The hypocrisy in this was unbelievable. But anyway, this caused quite a stir. And the stir hasn't ended, because there was more over the weekend, more details emerging. So on Sunday, the Sunday Times had this: Trump leak scandal engulfs Brexit party. So they're attempting to bring Brexit into this whole thing. So by association, and the association in this case is Richard Tice, who's on the right there standing beside Nigel Farage. Richard Tice, the chairman of the Brexit party, who is apparently dating Isabel Oakeshott, who is the journalist who broke the story in the Sunday Mail. Now, in this same article, and perhaps more importantly, they reported that the Metropolitan Police had launched an investigation on Friday, and that a suspect had been identified, and that there was that the possibility of a computer hack by a foreign state had been ruled out. Both the Sunday Times and the Mail on Sunday reported that intelligence officials from GCHQ were about to join this investigation in an attempt to find the suspect by examining email and phone records. But the scandal actually really hit on Friday, because our old friend Neil Basu from the Metropolitan Police had this to say: I would advise all owners, editors and publishers of social and mainstream media not to publish leaked government documents that may already be in their possession or which may be offered to them, and to turn them over to the police or their rightful owner, Her Majesty's government. So if you've got them and you're a journalist, don't hold on to them, get them to the police, get them to the government, because otherwise you could be prosecuted, is basically what he said. But by Saturday, unfortunately for him, the pressure and perhaps the irony of the UK having just held an international conference on media freedom, the pressure built, and so they did an about turn. And he had this to say: the Metropolitan Police respects the rights of the media and has no intention of seeking to prevent editors from publishing stories in the public interest in a liberal democracy. the media holds an important role in scrutinising the actions of the state. He said that we are, however, a body charged with enforcing the law, and we have received legal advice that has caused us to start a criminal inquiry into the leak of these specific documents as a potential breach of the Official Secrets Act. The focus of the investigation is clearly on identifying who is responsible for the leak. However, we have also been told the publication of these specific documents, now knowing that they may be a breach of the Official Secrets Act, could also constitute a criminal offence and one that carries no public interest defence. We know these documents and potentially others remain in circulation. We have a duty to prevent as well as detect crime, and the previous statement was intended to alert to the risk of breaching the Official Secrets Act. So that's the position of the police, Patrick. It's a bit pathetic that within a day, literally a day of the ending of this Media Freedom Conference in London, the police was attempting to shut down the actions of the media. And although they seem to have backtracked on that somewhat, they're still, frankly, the threat still lies, it seems.
What you saw there, the initial statement by Assistant Commissioner Basu, that's the natural reflex of the police state. That's the one to really pay attention to, and this has form actually, and we'll speak about that in a minute. But essentially they're wanting to, on behalf of the state, wanting to keep certain documents and certain things to remain secret. And that's the main point of this. I think where the government and the judiciary might have some problems in the public relations side of things in enforcing this, it seems like it might be easier and more expedient just to basically defer this to the police itself and then see what happens. And there was understandably a public backlash, as you pointed out, but I think this is very telling. This does also echo moves made in Australia last month with the raiding of journalists' offices. So where the police are given additional license within the kind of wider climate of more aggressive actions by the state in shutting down journalists and free speech under things like the Official Secrets Act, or in the U.S. under the Espionage Act. This is definitely a byproduct of what's been happening with WikiLeaks and Assange.
But you have an article here from February 2017 from a website called Courage. Britain eyes up its own Espionage Act.
So this is the Courage Foundation, and they're advocating on behalf of Assange and WikiLeaks on these issues. So I'm just reversing and rolling back the clock a little bit here to show you how this has come up. This was from a consultation that was done with regards to updating the Official Secrets Act. This is in process now. The judiciary is looking at the possibility of expanding the Official Secrets Act. So it's in the pipeline right now, but we're going back to the beginning, and you'll see this is very telling. It's the main point here is that prosecutors will move on people for disclosing information that's already in the public domain. That's really key. So if you go back to what Neil Basu's comments were, he's basically saying that it's illegal to publish things in the public domain that are already in the public domain. That's a really big leap forward from the previous position. Previously, once it's in the public domain, it's out, as in other words. So this is an attempt by the state clearly to keep things that are supposed to be secret, to keep them secret, and to make it illegal to divulge such secrets. And although there's pushback, it seems like in this current climate that this might be something the state, with all of its authoritarian tendencies, will start pushing a little bit harder on. That's why the WikiLeaks Assange case is so important. This is why so many people have flagged this up as an extremely, extremely grave situation because of exactly what we're seeing here, because of these comments by the assistant commissioner last week. So, but we just continue on here. Another key point, and this is something to note, and this was prompted, this effort is originated from the Cabinet Office in 2015. So this is policy or law that's being kind of drifted out from the cabinet office. And so they who made domestic threats against domestic news organizations for publishing Snowden revelations in 2013. And this is key in the digital age. I'll just read this slight passage here. The volume of information that can be disclosed without authorization is much greater than when the Official Secrets Act was updated in 1989, was originally drafted. I think that's a misprint there, but it's much earlier than that. So it could be argued that this means that the ability to cause damage to the national interest and the risk of such damage occurring has also increased. So you can see the language. If you read a lot of these articles now, the justification is that this is damaging the national interest. This is such a vague and arbitrary term, the national interest. What does this mean? It can mean anything. So this gives a very wide berth for the state to interpret any situation or any document as being damaging to the national interest. I've also seen in this story reports of talking about damaging the economy. That's even more arbitrary and vague, could damage economic interests of the nation. So you can see how this can be expanded. It gives almost unlimited license to the state to interpret what could be offensive in this case.
These are really good points.
Well, we're coming back onto language again. This is where it's very interesting. Patrick is putting across that we're using vague language, but we're also using political language. We're using deceitful language. We're using words that people don't really understand. And of course, David Scott has been pushing on this bit very hard. Why do you want to corrupt language in the way it's used so that you can confuse people, you can hoodwink them, and you can bring in policy that they wouldn't accept if they knew what was being proposed in the first place?
The term is Sopian language.
Dystopian language.
Sopian language, so it has a hidden meaning. But one of the key points that Patrick has brought out there once again, and we can't drive this home hard enough, is that everything is being driven from inside the cabinet office.
Yeah.
And this is hugely important. But Patrick, Consortium News here, after Assange's Espionage Act indictment, police move against more journalists for publishing classified information. And this is the Australian story that you're referring to, yes?
Yeah, so this dovetails directly into this situation here in the UK. And if people aren't aware, I think we did report on this in a previous UK column, but this has been widely reported in the news. So the Australian police, the National Security State Police in Australia, basically raided the homes of journalists and also the offices of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And the precedent here is they want to now gain access and have the power to edit and to delete anything that could threaten or compromise the national security or the national interest, if you want to expand the definition of that. But I just pulled a specific passage out of this article, which I'll show you here. It should chill the public as well as journalists, and this is Mark Strom speaking here, that these raids are all about intimidating journalists, intimidating whistleblowers, so that the mistakes made by government, including potential crimes by the military, in this case, remain covered up, remain secret, do not fall into the public domain. That's the president of Australia's Journalists Union talking there. So this is already happening in Australia, and as you know, Australia is a test bed for a lot of things that happen in Europe and also in North America. So they've pushed really hard in Australia on this to infringe on press freedom. It's outrageous what happened in Australia last month. If you go back and look at the story, it's unbelievable. But they were basically, the journalist was reporting on the state. She published a letter, or had a letter, a secret letter between government officials to begin spying on Australian citizens. So a secret letter about spying on Australian citizens, and this triggered a police raid of the home of the journalist. The other reportage was about special forces activity, illegal activity in Afghanistan. This is stuff that's widely reported and known to be happening throughout the NATO member states' troop deployments in Afghanistan. It's no big secret, but you can see the state really ramping up their efforts here. I believe the wind is at their back. The longer Julian Assange is in Belmarsh, the longer he is the situation is deteriorating, the longer those rights are being infringed, and there's no real evidence to back up the U.S. or British claims of that he's somehow a threat to national security or has broken some laws or the reinterpreting of laws or the reinterpreting of the Espionage Act or the Official Secrets Act. This only pushes us this further down the road for an authoritarian future.
Yes, now you've put your take on last week's Media Freedom Conference on 21st Century War. Britain's media freedom is smokescreen to hide the persecution of journalists who expose war crimes. And what I think I took out of that conference, Patrick, was that really what Jeremy Hunt was attempting to do was to protect whatever journalists are working in foreign countries on behalf of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, highlight any issues of torture or imprisonment of journalists in foreign countries. But of course, nothing said about what happened in Australia and nothing said about Julian Assange, although many people attempted to inject that particular issue into that conference.
Yeah, and so if you look at this story, this is the main point of Neil Basu's comments, and also Jeremy Hunt. If you noticed, he responded saying that in response, seemingly to the Met Assistant Commissioner's statement about journalists and people on social media not publishing stuff that's already out in the public domain. Think about that, social media as well as the press. Okay, so Jeremy Hunt's reply was that. That it shouldn't be right that journalists or editors should be prosecuted or should be falling under the law for publishing things that are in the public interest. It's kind of a half-hearted, soft kind of, it seems like I'm going to make a statement here that I believe Jeremy Hunt is playing the role of controlled opposition to the police state. In this, he's making a half-hearted statement. This is what the Media Freedom Conference is all about. It's an Orwellian title. The reality is, someone like Jeremy Hunt, in a way, is much more malleable than a Boris Johnson even. So I believe the national security state, the secret security state, would favor someone like Jeremy Hunt over Boris Johnson. He's extremely malleable. He will bend in any position that's required, as we can see, as you've shown in the first 20 minutes of this program, a number of examples where Hunt has done this. And I believe he's playing the role of controlled opposition because not once has he mentioned Assange or WikiLeaks. This is the biggest precedent case in the world. And he's allowing the U.S. to exert universal jurisdiction. So while you say, Mike, he's protecting British journalists or foreign nationals abroad, that's what media freedom is about. That's on behalf of the state in some ways. But what's really happening is Britain is enabling the United States to track down, to apprehend any journalist, anybody who's publishing anything that's embarrassing to the United States, and have them extradited, have them rendered in extraordinary rendition fashion from sovereign territory like the Ecuadorian embassy, and then sent off and extradited to the United States, non-U.S. citizens from organizations not in the U.S., being helped by their special relationship partner, in this case, Britain. That's the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I just want to end this section with this from the Mail. This is from the Sunday Mail, I believe. The headline is, Sir Kim Darroch vouched for British ex-spy Christopher Steele, who put together the dirty dossier on Trump and told US officials he was absolutely legit. So they're saying that this is revealed in the latest leaks from memos in Downing Street. Mr. Steele's so-called dodgy dossier alleged Mr. Trump colluded with Russia to fix the 2016 election, also claimed he paid prostitutes to urinate on him in a Moscow hotel room. This is the important things that the Mail feels that they need to highlight. So I was quite interested in this because it occurred to me, or the question occurred to me, why would a serving British ambassador vouch for a former Secret Intelligence Service person if that person was not wholly backed by the Foreign Commonwealth Office? So I popped a message off to Alex Thompson earlier, and he replied to me saying no, quite clearly no. He said any ex-Secret Intelligence Service man who speaks or allows himself to be spoken of as an ex-Secret Intelligence Service man without being an actual whistleblower is by definition blowing his cover and breaking the statutory understanding of the Official Secrets Act. Hence, he is doing so on the understanding that he has Whitehall's license. So, in Alex's opinion, it's absolutely clear that Darragh, if he was giving legitimacy to Christopher Steele, was giving legitimacy to Christopher Steele with the full understanding and agreement of the British government. And Patrick, just very briefly, please, it seems to me that under those circumstances, therefore, the British government is 100% behind Russiagate.
Yes, yeah, I think that's an important point to make. But I want to throw another question and get your opinion on this, Mike and Brian. The Darragh leaks, the cable leaks. It's the Foreign Office apparently did an internal investigation. They said there was no external hacking, that this was a leak, and this sort of triggered the Metropolitan Police investigation. The important point about this is, if this was an internal leak, what was the point of the leak? What was the purpose of the leak? And I'm going to contend that while it might, it certainly hurt Boris Johnson a little bit in terms of the polling. So this benefited the Hunt or the secret SIS camp, the Hunt camp in this way. But more than that, this event itself has triggered this police investigation. Clearly, Neil Basu made the clear statement of what the intention was of the Metropolitan Police, was to criminalize the publication of a material that's already in the public domain, to pursue people for republishing stuff that's already in the public domain. That I'm going to say it's quite possible that this was a controlled leak, and the purpose of it was to give the state additional powers and to create a kind of the journalist involved clearly has a relationship with the Foreign Office, and some people has written about other people like this in the past. There's clearly a strong link there between the journalists from the Mail on Sunday. So I think you should look closely at this possibility that this was engineered in order to increase state powers in this regard. What are your thoughts on this, guys?
Go ahead.
I completely agree with that. You're right. Isabel Oakeshott is about as establishment as is possible to get. She was, she went to school in Gordonstoun, for goodness sake. She is as establishment as it gets. She is exactly the type of person I would expect this type of information to be leaked through, if that was the case. So I think that's a very plausible scenario. And at the end of the day, we can see the effect of it. Okay. The timing hasn't worked out, perhaps with the conference happening literally the day before, but I think that this absolutely plays to discredit Boris on one hand and promote Hunt. But the key focus, I think, is on the mainstream media and on the freedom of the press, and it's about time that anybody within the mainstream media that believes in the idea of the freedom of the press, it's about time they started understanding what's going on around them and actually starting to come onto the right side, shall we say, and holding government to account, because at the moment they're merely acting as government mouthpieces.
Yep. Okay. Well, where do we go?
Right,
Well,
let's just say that if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. Where you can help us out there, join, and various options for doing that. A quick reminder that AV10 DVD is still available on the UK Column shop, and also a 21st Century Wire. And a reminder that AV 10.1 will be taking place on Sunday the 27th of October in the Holiday Inn in Kensington. And details and tickets available at alternativeview.co.uk.
Okay, and we'll add to that. So today, July 15th, Exeter, Phoenix, Gandhi Street, Exeter, is a 5G awareness event. So these have been really excellent events. If you can get there, please do. If you can't, perhaps you'd help advertise it.
Okay, now, Patrick, let's just briefly discuss the Epstein case, if you could. Now, we were suggesting on Friday's UK column news that there were links to Israel here, but you seem to be, you've got an article here from the Times of Israel. Epstein case oozes into Israeli political mud as Netanyahu-Barak trade barbs.
I just thought I'd point this out because the Israel election is doing a rerun. I think it's going to be in mid-September. And so Netanyahu is just basically caretaker prime minister at the moment. There's going to be a rerun, and Ehud Barak is starting a new political party, the Israel Democratic Party. And so Netanyahu is already using his relationship or his friendship or close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein against him in the Israeli press. This is what this article is about here in the Times of Israel. But it should also be pointed out that Netanyahu has been also accused of blackmailing Bill Clinton in a book that came out by Daniel Halper, I believe, former editor of the Weekly Standard. This was in 2014, blackmailing Clinton over the Monica Lewinsky tapes in order to try to get Jonathan Pollard released, the notorious Israeli spy held in U.S. federal custody for many years. So, but if you look at the coverage of the Epstein case, look very closely, especially in the United States and in Britain. They'll do anything possible to wipe or to obscure the Israeli connections to Jeffrey Epstein and to this case. There's so many, and a lot of his big defenders in this regard are also prominent defenders of Israel as well. So there seems to be a concerted effort to sort of move the conversation away from that and to focus on other things like Trump's labor secretary, former Florida DA or federal attorney, Alex Acosta, who was forced to resign recently. So again, all the conversations going away from that. And so I'm more likely to want to look to what they're ignoring. In this case, it's the Israeli connection. So the timing of this is interesting, how this is playing out with the relationship with the contestants in the Israeli run-up. But clearly there's links to the intelligence services. This also came out. This was admitted by Acosta himself, or is said to him to back off. He's protected by U.S. intelligence. It wasn't specific, but intelligence agencies. But certainly the presence of Ehud Barak on Jeffrey Epstein's private jets at that time, when he was prime minister of Israel from 1999 to 2001, should raise a lot of concern to a lot of people.
Okay, now I just wanted to briefly get your opinion on this, Patrick, because Donald Trump was being a bit controversial over the weekend. He had a series of tweets. He said, "So interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt and inept anywhere in the world, if they have a functioning government at all, now loudly and viciously telling people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on the earth, how our government is to be run. Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, then come back and show us how to do it over here. These places need your help badly. You can't leave fast enough. I'm sure that Nancy Pelosi would be very happy to quickly work out free travel arrangements." So I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Patrick, but just before you comment on it, I'll just show you what just one example of what the British mainstream media has been doing with this. Because every British mainstream media headline is about the same. Theresa May slaps down Donald Trump after completely unacceptable race rant. So this series of tweets is being presented as racial commentary by the British mainstream press, the Mail, the Sun. A lot of them are all saying this. In fact, what Theresa May said was that her spokesperson said that the tweets were unacceptable and they wouldn't make any further comment about it. Do you view what I just read out as being a race rant?
Not specifically. I think you could say that there are racial overtones, undertones with those comments. But I think who he's referring to specifically, Rashida Tlaib of Palestinian origin, and also Ilhan Omar from Somalia. Somalia is a country that the United States has done quite a lot to undermine and destabilize over the years. So that's kind of not a very clever statement by the president there. Palestine, that's pretty obvious. Both of those reps are being targeted for their lack of loyalty to Israel publicly, all over social media by conservative pundits. So there's now this kind of feeling on the right in America that if you're not supporting Israel, that's anti-American. And if you think about how this works on the back of a Jeremy Corbyn persecution scenario, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, I think this is what's driving some of this below. The problem is it's getting mainstreamed in America, and you have to remember America is a nation of immigrants, especially elected representatives. What could be more American than that? They're living the dream. They immigrate to America and they're serving in Congress. I mean, the president himself should be celebrating this as a great thing and a testament to what a great country America is. But now we have the opposite. But I will say this. I was told last week by someone who's close to some members of the White House, Donald Trump does not write most of these tweets. These are written by somebody for Trump, and they're tweeted out. So, but I will inquire further about that this week because I found that to be a very interesting point. So who is writing Donald Trump's tweets? What level of license do they have? So the president himself is not completely in control of his Twitter account, is what I would say.
Okay.
Well, what came into my mind, Pat, is perhaps it's artificial intelligence. It isn't really a person at all writing those tweets, and it could be David Cameron who's helping out. It's a possibility, isn't it? Well, if it's not going too well in the States there under Trump, perhaps people should migrate to France because President Macron has announced that he's moving into space.
Oh, really?
This is really excellent news that he's now declaring that the move is going to see French Airborne Armed Forces rebranded as the Air and Space Force. Total investment in the new venture is not confirmed. So he can't actually control the country at the moment. Major breakdown with taxes and everything else. And of course, that produced the yellow vest. So his response is not to help people in the community, but is to get into space. It's impressive stuff. There we are. It says a new spatial and military doctrine has been proposed to me by the ministry, which I have approved, will allow us to ensure our defence of space. We will reinforce our knowledge of the situation in space. We will better protect our satellites. And I can't help laugh over this because I wonder whether there's a lot of space in his head. And we just remind people that as far as the UK Columns article back in 2008, written by Dave Barmby, there was a lot of evidence to say that it was the French that helped squash Britain's efforts to get more satellites into space.
Was, yes.
So perhaps we'll leave it there. Well, Patrick, thank you very much for joining us. We'll just say thank you to all of our viewers, wherever you are in the world, US, Canada, France, Spain, Germany, Greece, Cyprus, Iceland, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and a few other places. We do appreciate your support. Keep watching, keep spreading the news, and please pass on details of UK Column to friends if you possibly can. That's it for today. We will be back at the same time on Wednesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.